Chapter 6 The Big Idea. 3 things happened later that same afternoon. Nick and Janet Fisk had missed the bus because of a school newspaper meeting, so they walked home together. They were seeing who could walk along the curb without falling. It took a lot of concentration, and when Janet stepped on into the street, Nick said, "That's 3 points for me." But Janet said, "I didn't fall. I saw something. Look." She bent down and picked up a gold ballpoint pen, the fancy kind. That was the first thing Janet finding the pen. They got back on the curb, and Nick followed Janet, putting one foot carefully in front of the other on the narrow concrete curb. And while he stepped along, he thought back over the school day, especially about his report and what Mrs. Granger had said about words at the end of the period finally sent in. That was the second thing, understanding what Mrs. Granger had said. She said, "Who says dog means dog? You did, Nicholas." "You did, Nicholas," he repeated to himself. "I do," Nick thought, still putting one foot in front of the other, following Janet. What does that mean? And then Nick remembered something. When he was about 2 years old, his mom had bought him one of those unbroken cassette players and bunch of sing-along tapes. He had loved them, and he played them over and over and over and over. He would carry the tape and the player to his mom or his bigger brother or his father and band them together and say, "Gawagala, gawagala, gawagala," until someone put the cassette in the machine and turned it on. And for 3 years, whatever he said, "Gawagala," his family knew what he wanted to hear, those pretty sounds made with voice and instruments. Then, when Nick went to preschool, he learned that if he wanted his teacher and other kids to understand him, he had to use the word music. But Gala meant that nice sound to Nick, because Nick said so. "Who says Gala means music? You did, Nicholas." "No fair," yelled Janet. They were at the corner of their own street, and Nick had bumped into her, completely absorbed in his thoughts. Janet stumped up the curb, and the gold pen in her hand clattered onto the street. "Sorry, I didn't mean to, honest," said Nick. I just wasn't watching. Here." Nick stopped over and picked up the pen and held it on to her. "Here's your..." And that's when the third thing happened. Nick didn't say pen instead. He said, "Here's your Frindle." "Frindle?" Janet took her pen and looked at him like he was nuts. She wrinkled her nose and said, "What's a Frindle?" Nick grinned and said, "You'll find out. See ya later." It was there at the corner of Spring Street and South Grand Avenue, block from home on a September afternoon. That's when Nick got a big idea. And by the time he had run down the street and up the steps and through the door and upstairs to his room, it wasn't just a big idea. It was a plan, a hall plan, just beginning for Nick to put it into action. And action was Nick's middle name. The next day after school, the plan began. Nick walked into the penny pantry store and asked the lady behind the counter for a Frindle. She squinted at him. "A what?" "A Frindle, please. A black one," said Nick, smiling at her. She leaned over close and aimed one ear at him. "You want what?" "A Frindle." And this time Nick pointed at the ballpoint pens behind her on the shelf. A black one, please." The lady handed Nick the pen. He handed her the 49 cents, said thank you, and left the store. 6 days later, Janet stood at the corner of penny pantry, same store. same lady. John had come into the lady before, and Pete the day before that, and Chris the day before that, and Dave the day before that. Janet was the fifth kid that Nick had sent there to ask that woman for a Frindle. And then she asked. The lady reached right for the pens and said, "Blue or black?" Nick was standing one aisle away at the candy racks, and he was grinning. Frindle was a real word. It meant pen. Who says Frindle means pen? You did, Nicholas. Half an hour later, a group of serious fifth graders has a meeting in Nick's playroom. It was John, Pete, Dave, Chris, and Janet. At Nick. And that's 6 kids, 6 secret engine. They held up their right hands and read the oath Nick had written out. "From this day on and forever, I will never use the word pen again. Instead, I will use the word Frindle, and I will do everything possible so others will, too." And all 6 of them signed the oath with Nick's Frindle. The plan would work. Thanks, Miss Granger. Chapter 7. Word Wars. School was the perfect place to launch a new word, and since this was a major history event, Nick wanted to begin in exactly the right class, 7-period language arts. Nick raised his hand first thing after the bell rang and said, "Miss Granger, I forgot my Frindle." Sitting 3 rows away, John blurted out, "I have an extra one you can borrow, Nick." Then John made a big show of looking for something in his backpack. "I think I have an extra Frindle. I told my mom to get me 3 or 4. I'm sure I had an extra Frindle in here yesterday, but I must have taken it. Wait, oh yeah, here it is." And then John made a big show of throwing it over to Nick, and Nick missed it on purpose. Then he made a big show of finding it. Mrs. Granger and every kid in the class got the message loud and clear. That black plastic thing that Nick borrowed from John has a funny name, a different name, a new name, Frindle. There was a lot of giggling, but Mrs. Granger turned up the power in her eyes and swept the room into silence. And the rest of class went by according to her plan. As everyone was leaving after class, Miss Granger said, "Nicholas, I'd like to have a word with you." And he emphasized the word. Nick's mouth felt dry and he gulped, but his mind stayed clear. He walked up to her desk. "Yes, Miss Granger? It's a funny idea, Nicholas, but I will not have my class disrupt again. Is that clear?" Her eyes were lit up, but it was mostly light, not much heat. "Idea? What idea?" asked Nick, and he tried to make his eyes as blank as possible. "You know what I mean, Nicholas. I am talking about the performance that you and John had at the start of class. I'm talking about this." And she held up her pen, an old maroon fountain pen with a blue cap. "But I really didn't have a Frindle with me," said Nick, amazing at his own bravery. And hiding behind his glasses, Nick kept his eyes wide and blank. Mrs. Granger's eyes flashed, and they're narrow, and her lips formed a thin, hard line. She was quiet for a few seconds, and then she said, "I see, very well. Then I guess you have nothing more to discuss today. Nicholas, you may go." "Thanks, Miss Granger," said Nick, and he grabbed his backpack and headed for the door. And when he was just stepping into the hallway, he said, "And I promise I won't ever forget my Frindle again. Bye."